Chapter 25, 2033 hours. April 16th, 2539. Military calendar. Me Trome system. Planet boundary. High equatorial orbit. UNSC supercarrier Neferis. Moving to engage the Covenant fleet. The last vestige of Task Force Lima concluded its orbit around boundary. In a desperate attempt to throw the Covenant armada off balance, Captain Alistair Fulton had ordered half the fleet comprised of his two light cruisers, the Pelium and Hydaspes, to conduct a similar maneuver from the opposite direction. As they whipped around the planet inverse to his path, they were ordered to drop the rest of their nuclear mines in hopes that the Covenant would pursue the supercarrier. Unfortunately for the human commanders, however, the Covenant had become preoccupied by the frontal assault minutes earlier. The leader of the task force had thrown everything they could muster at their enemy, losing one already damaged destroyer and watching another atomized into nothingness. It was hubris to think their modest task force could withstand the might of the Covenant. The only silver lining to the heroic sacrifice of his last destroyer was that it bought them just enough time to run the gauntlet through several Covenant ships and away from their blockade over the metropolis of Boundary's capital. The crew of the supercarrier sat in silence for the rest of their brief journey around the planet, processing the utter destruction offered by their alien foe. As the crew of the Neferis rounded back into visual range of the supercontinent below, the ship's sensors began processing hazy, ionized images as they crested the horizon on the day side of the planet. "Aretes," Captain Fulton said quietly. "Increase magnification." "How did we do?" The forward display monitor blinked once, then twice, as the lens of magnification increased by several dozen factors to show a graveyard. One Covenant battlecruiser listed aimlessly, tumbling end over end like a dazed whale gliding through water. Another was venting atmosphere in several places and had a completely crumpled midsection. An angry gash was torn into its underbelly, just beyond he deduced as the cause of the damage. There lay the two light cruisers, steadfast and forlorn. Their superstructures were glowing with radiant heat. They spun in place, bombarded by plasma, erupting into a ball of white-hot flame and slag as they melted away silently. One of the vessels had maximized the effects of their slingshot maneuver around the planet and increased velocity enough to dodge the first volley of plasma before taking a direct hit to the bow. After letting loose every viable piece of ordnance aboard, they simply rammed the closest vessel in a desperate bid to buy the supercarrier more time. The second cruiser that trailed behind the first did not fare so well in comparison. Seeing the outlandish attempt to destroy their vessels, the Covenant shipmasters immediately let loose an unrivaled barrage of plasma torpedoes as the partner of the first. They must have been tired of toying with their prey because they didn't even allow the human vessel to get within proximity of them. Enough plasma impacted the diminutive cruiser that the networked lattice of superhardened titanium A battle plates simply dissolved like rain hitting a paper. The superheated bolts of plasma disintegrated the remains, and a collection of metal and carbon and so much radioactive dust were all that remained, flung to the outer reaches of space for all time. Several battle cruisers remained in the fight once again, and fanned outward from the planet in a defensive posture. Assuredly, the alien fleet couldn't know how many more human vessels were in system or were scheduled to arrive to join the fight, but it didn't seem like they were taking the chance. The next cruiser was still scarred from battle days earlier, and pockmarked with deep gashes from stem to stern. That must have been the last ship they passed after their first orbit, he thought. They were all alone now, here, in the face of an indomitable foe. Alistair had thrown everything he could muster at them, and it hardly gave them a black eye. Sure, they had managed to take out a few ships, but in the end, it didn't matter. The millions of scared, helpless civilians remained on the planet below, unable to escape or risk being shot straight out of the skies. He hoped his efforts made any difference at all, and that Bernard Ocasio and his fleet of volunteers could evacuate at least some of the denizens below. As he began to issue his final orders, the sleek alien craft moved about and oriented on them. They hung as they swayed in their majesty while daring anyone to come at them, undeterred by their losses. Captain Fulton caught several sidelong glances from his bridge crew. Their weariness was painted on their faces, plain as day. They knew what he was about to ask, and it was no easier to issue the order than to accept it. After confirming his last messages were relayed to the appropriate parties on the ground, including the UNSC ground and air wing commanders, he turned to his navigation officer. "Your lives will not be wasted, ladies and gentlemen. I will see to that personally. Nav, set course for 080 by 143. Take us in at best speed. If they want another black eye, then I'll gladly oblige. The supercarrier had just completed its full elliptical orbit around the planet, and the reactors were already redlining from the stress. The ship shuddered to overcome its inertia, and powered forward to strike one last time. They charged like the cavalry of old and fired their remaining Archer missiles and initiated their point defense guns at Seraph long-range fighters, harassing them like flies on a corpse. Plasma torpedoes barreled toward the massive flagship and struck the hull. Warning klaxons blared, lights flickered, and damage reports rang out on all channels. Captain Fulton narrowed his gaze on the enemy and inhaled sharply through his nose. He gripped his armrests and rang out a rallying cry even the most battle-hardened Sangheili warrior would balk at. For the UNSC, for Earth, fight! His voice rose over the violent commotion on the bridge. All hands, it's been an honor serving with you. They were heading into the abyss, and there's no one else in the galaxy he'd rather have by his side than the men and women of the Nefiris. The ride down from the Covenant battlecruiser, codenamed Easy Catch, was relatively uneventful by Spartan standards. As they entered the lower atmosphere of the planet, the team received the final words of Captain Fulton and a brief message from the governor of Boundary. In no shape for another fight, Arthur had ordered Sheila to take their captured Type 44 Phantom troop carrier down to the coordinates relayed to them by the planet's artificial intelligence. He had directed Sheila to take an indirect route over the vast ocean to the west of the supercontinent, to lay low and avoid detection. On 2 occasions since they received their orders, a curious banshee or two hailed them as to why they were so far out from the combat zone and why they were flying alone. Whether it was a stroke of sheer dumb luck, or the fact that the Phantom could outrun a banshee, Arthur did not know. He was just thankful that they didn't have to orchestrate an aerial battle in an alien aircraft, especially one that could be easily outmaneuvered by the nimbler fighter craft. Several hours of flight time passed before the reason they were spared became painfully obvious. Although out of reach of its immediate effects, the Spartans' onboard computers could still pick up the massive spike in radiation, as the familiar sounds of alarms rang in their helmets. "What is it? Plasma bombardment or nukes?" Cal asked matter-of-factly from the troop. She had stripped her SRS-99 sniper rifle down and was conducting some field maintenance on the rifle. She had positioned herself in an open alcove of the bay where she tended to the rifle with all the loving care that a mother would show their newborn, gently cleaning and inspecting piece by piece. Arthur knew the ritual was not because the rifle actually needed cleaning or inspection, but to calm her nerves. When the ship section detached and was jettisoned into space, the pair of Spartans had little in the way of changing their fate. They had been fortunate to grab onto debris that slowed their ejection, only slowing them enough to remain in the derelict shell of the hangar they were in. For several minutes, while they waited for the harrowing rescue by Sheila, they sat in the icy void of space, alone and without support. Whether they admitted it or not, it rattled them. Sheila fumbled over several controls at the pilot station for a moment before discovering what she was looking for. A view screen flickered to life, displaying a video feed from an aft turret emplacement. It showed a green-tinted, grainy image filled with brilliant columns of fire and light. One of the remaining Covenant battlecruisers had positioned themselves over the city center of the capital, hanging in the night sky. Its silver-sheened hull was mirroring the dancing flames below. The ventral cannon quickly warmed from a dull red to a sharp sienna. Then finally a white-hot column of superheated plasma fell upon the earth below. "It's over," she said and motioned for Arthur to come forward. "They've started glassing the planet." Arthur leaned over the panel for a brief moment to inspect the image he'd seen a dozen times before, on a dozen different human colonies. He forced himself to watch the utter carnage as buildings, people, and crops erupted in a blaze, only to be vitrified moments later into molten heaps. Without saying a word, he exited the cockpit of the Phantom and moved toward the portside exterior, and opened the bay door. A torrent of wind buffeted the interior and rocked him back slightly. He stepped out onto the canard of the transport vessel and situated himself in a squatting position, holding onto the plasma turret anchored to its base for support. He stayed there for the rest of the flight and let the images burn into his memory, as to never forget what they fought so hard to defend. They reached their rendezvous point with the Prowler as they were preparing to take off. Their aft drop bay remained open to allow the Phantom to simply glide in for future study and analysis. Any piece of Covenant technology was coveted by the eggheads at Oni. The anti-gravity pods hummed in a low frequency as Sheila eased it into its final resting position and deactivated the craft. The trio of Spartan commandos exited the Phantom and were intercepted by Solomon and Lieutenant Green as the bay lights shifted from white to red. They stood side by side, the ODST with a wave of emotions playing over his face. The platoon commander's initial elation to see some familiar faces exit. The Phantom was replaced by the realization that there were none of his own troops coming out. He was an orbital drop shock trooper, and was no stranger to losing men and women under his charge, but he at least expected some of his platoon to make it back in one piece. Solomon stood stoic as ever, helmet still on, and nonchalantly swiped his index and middle finger on the helmet's faceplate. One small gesture of comfort for his exhausted brother and sisters. Arthur strode up to Solomon and gave him a quick jab to the shoulder in a playful gesture. Nod ding in silent approval of a job well done. Despite the lack of planning, resources, and equipment, Solomon had done the impossible, just like they always did. Come on, sir. Commander Keller's expecting us. Our flight window is closing fast if we want to make it off this rock. Captain Fulton's trying to buy us a little more time. Right, he said solemnly, and the group made their way through the reception area and back toward the Prowler's Bridge. As they stepped, the hangar door retracted behind them. With a faint hydraulic hiss, the area was secured, airtight, and ready for departure. Arthur felt the telltale tug of acceleration hit his body, and he knew they were on their way. The remaining members of Teal Force entered the bridge of the command deck and were surprised to find not only Commander Keller and her crew, but Mr. Bernardo in the flesh. He stood next to the Prowler captain with arms folded. The pair were discussing something in hushed tones. A 3D image of the planet hovered in front of them. Arthur's titanium sabatons reverberated on the deck of the ship and alerted them to his presence. He and his team snapped to attention. Commander Keller, Teal Force. Some timing, big man, Ocasio interrupted in a mocking tone. Commander Keller here was just about to leave you and your friends in the dust. Enough, Bernard, the silver-haired naval officer said. And at ease, Spartans. Join us. I was just trying to explain to our spirited guest that if he doesn't get off my ship and over to us soon, then he won't get another chance. As I'm sure you're aware, the Covenant have begun glassing the surface of Boundary. She turned to Ocasio and adjusted her tone from one of a stern mother scolding a child to something softer as Arthur and his team approached. Bernard, I know you won't accept it, but we're out of time and options. You've accomplished an impossible task of getting all those people off-world, and now it's time for you to join them. We can't save anymore. Hell, we might not even be able to save ourselves. I implore you, let me take you back to your freighter. Those people are going to need your leadership after they get to a new settlement. His face flashed hot red, and fists slammed the bulkhead nearest his side and hung there. Sheila, obviously still a little on edge from the debacle aboard the Easy Catch, shifted her gait to intercept Ocasio if things got any more heated. The commander, hands at her sides, waved a hand under the display mount to wave off the armored soldier. I cannot accept that as an answer, Commander, he shouted. Sheila took half a step forward as if to dare the man to make another move. It was Arthur's turn to raise a gauntleted hand to the petty officer, and turned to the desperate man. Sir, there's nothing more we can do. I'm sorry. Arthur spoke up. Ocasio shifted his rage to the towering human-shaped tank. At that moment, Arthur was glad he was wearing half a ton of Mjolnir armor, because if looks could kill, then he would have taken a shot through the head. His fist remained raised and pinned to the wall as if to deny its ability to contain his anger. Tears were beginning to well in his eyes. Do you know how many people my fleet were able to save, Tinman? The words fell like a plasma strike on Arthur's conscience, venom dripping with every syllable. No, sir. Less than 100,000. Those that were lucky enough to even make it across the continent in time or dodge plasma rounds from those damn fighter craft. Do you know what that means? Arthur remained silent. Commander Keller attempted to disarm the exchange to no avail. Perhaps we should... It means, he said loudly to cut off the Prowler captain's sentence, that we save less than 1% of Boundary's population. Now tell me, big man, does that sound like everything we could do? It was Solomon who stepped in for Arthur this time. The usually kind-hearted, joking persona was replaced by a deadly serious tone. He had lost plenty of friends and those he considered family over the last 15 years, and wouldn't sit idly by as his team leader was being berated by a broken man. I think it's time you leave, Solomon said. Or what? You're going to make me disappear too? Solomon and the rest of the Spartans didn't know what he meant by that, nor did they care to entertain the question. No, sir. But I will forcibly remove you if necessary. I don't think that's necessary, Sierra 069. Keller chimed in again. Please, Mr. Ocasio, go to your people. They need you. I'm sorry we couldn't do more, but at least we saved some. The man lowered his fist and laughed in defeat. Some. He chuckled. What a joke. Me and the rest of those you couldn't save will see you in hell. He grabbed a tablet off the table next to him and stared down at the Spartan guard dogs behind Commander Keller. He spat on the deck directly in front of the Prowler captain's polished flight boots and muscled his way toward the exit. As soon as he was away, Commander Keller gave the order to enable their stealth package and sped off toward the night sky under speed to avoid detection by the remaining fleet in orbit. Upon reaching a safe distance away from the planet, they hung in the nothingness of deep space and observed for a moment their resounding defeat at the hands of the Covenant. Arthur and his team dismissed themselves from the bridge shortly after takeoff and moved toward the berthing area. As they marched in silence down the short corridor away from the bridge, Lieutenant Green paused a moment to gaze at a display monitor mounted to a pipe fitting. Solomon turned and could see as he was passing by the Covenant behemoths crisscrossing the planet. No square meter missed. There were no more spy drones or other satellites to maintain a watchful eye. So the commander had ordered the ship into the furthest libration point away from Boundary, situating them in a comfortable spot next to Tarvos and Far, enough away they could use their long-range scanners. You did good, sir, Solomon said softly. I've fought with a lot of hell jumpers over the years, and I can say your crew was one of the best. Arthur overheard the exchange and kept walking. He didn't know if the words were true or not, but the slightly relaxed look on the young lieutenant's face told him those words hit home. It was never easy to lose a man, but to lose nearly an entire platoon was tough news to swallow for any soldier. Arthur, Cal, and Sheila continued their walk down the corridor to find a maintenance bay where they could attend to their damaged armor and maybe catch a few hours of shut-eye. After a while, the trio of Spartans settled in and raised the bridge camera to a display in the maintenance bay. As it snapped to life, the bay doors slid open to reveal the last member of their team. There was nothing left to say. Arthur, Solomon, Sheila, and Cal sat in the cramped maintenance area and watched for several minutes as raging torrents of fire and smoke enveloped the beleaguered city in wave after wave of destruction. The Covenant ships that had comprised the blockade above the planet had since moved back toward the planet's surface to assist in the efforts to glass the rest of the surface. Nothing was spared. They started with the capital and eventually made their way to the north, over the mountain range, and beyond to Salvation. They pushed outward to the endless fields of staple crops that were so vital to the livelihood of the inner colonies. Deciding he had seen enough, Arthur broke the silence that permeated the impromptu berthing area. He then raised the bridge. Any word from Captain Fulton or the rest of the fleet, ma'am? Unfortunately, no, Arthur, she said. He reached out to me shortly before conducting his final assault on their fleet. Intel suggests they closed with the enemy and tried to do as much damage as he could to buy the precious minutes it took to get the remaining civilian transports and your team to safety. Where to now, then? Sheila asked. You're to report back to Fleet Comm with myself after our mandatory randomized slip space jumps back to UNSC-controlled space. Arthur took off his helmet to show close-cropped sandy blonde hair. His eyes were sunken, which pronounced his faded scars across his cheekbones and forehead. The petty officer turned to the rest of Teal Team and studied them with a hardened, almost woeful expression on his face. Their armor was beat to hell. Carbon-scored streaks of plasma rounds pepped each of them. Sheila sported a nasty breach to her midsection held together with a field patch. Cal was lucky to miss the brunt of the Hunter's fuel rod cannon and suffered only burns and a severe concussion. He looked up from their injured bodies to lock eyes with each of them. We get patched up and find our next mission. We owe Captain Fulton, Governor Huxley, and the rest of Boundary to keep fighting. That's what they would have wanted. Arthur cracked just a hint of a smile and tucked his helmet under his arm. Teal Team, Fallout.